It began like every other night on The Late Show. The lights were blinding, the audience electric, the band riding that familiar jazz tempo that always promised fun, mischief, and late-night charm. Stephen Colbert was in his rhythm, a grin sharp enough to slice tension before it ever had a chance to form. Across from him sat Samuel L. Jackson, calm, confident, a man who'd stared down tougher crowds than this and walked away with applause. The banter started light, effortless. Stephen teased about Marvel cameos, about that famous glare. The audience loved it. Samuel played along, tossing back witty one-liners, his laughter deep and grounded. It was television perfection. Until Stephen leaned forward, eyes glinting with mischief, and said the line that shifted everything. "So, Sam," he began, pausing just long enough to let the crowd anticipate the punchline. "When you're not yelling at people on screen, do you ever, yell at them in real life? Or is that just your thing?" The audience erupted with laughter, loud, eager, unthinking. But Samuel didn't move. The smile that had lit his face seconds ago froze mid-curve. His fingers tightened just slightly on the arm of the chair. It wasn't the question itself. It was the familiarity of it. The way humor so easily turned into a cage. The crowd's laughter suddenly sounded different. Not joyful, but mocking. Echoing years of late-night panels where anger and black masculinity became punchlines dressed up as entertainment. Colbert caught it. You could see it flicker across his face, that tiny flash of, "Oh no." He tried to recover, chuckling awkwardly. "I mean that in the best way, of course. You've got, presence, intensity." But Samuel wasn't blinking. His silence spoke louder than any outburst could have. The air in the studio thickened. Even the audience began to sense they were no longer watching a comedy show. They were watching a boundary form. Inside Samuel's mind, flashes of memory rose. Old interviews where he was asked to lighten up, critics who called him too intimidating, talk show moments where his dignity had been packaged as entertainment. He'd learned long ago to swallow irritation, to smile for the cameras, to let it slide, because that's what professionalism demanded. But something about this night felt different. It wasn't rage that built inside him. It was fatigue. A quiet, heavy kind of exhaustion that came from decades of being powerful, but still misread. His eyes met Stephen's, and behind that gaze was a message. "You don't get to laugh at what I've lived through." Stephen sensed the shift. The safety of the segment was gone. The teleprompter was still scrolling, but the rhythm had vanished. He tried to keep the audience laughing, forcing another joke. "Hey, don't give me that look! You're scaring me already!" The laughter this time was scattered, nervous. Samuel finally leaned forward, voice low but steady. "You ever notice how people always think a man's passion looks like anger when they don't understand where it comes from?" The words landed like a pin drop in a cathedral. The room fell silent. The audience didn't know whether to clap or hold their breath. Stephen shifted in his seat, unsure if this was still part of the show. Samuel continued, his tone controlled, deliberate. "You call it yelling. I call it telling the truth with volume. Maybe that's what makes people uncomfortable. It wasn't confrontation. It was revelation, the kind that cuts through comedy and exposes what's real." Colbert smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, that's one way to put it," he murmured, but his usual rhythm was gone. He glanced toward the producers behind the cameras, the universal sign of a host losing his footing. Samuel just leaned back, the faintest trace of a smile forming now, not amusement, but something closer to peace. He'd said what needed to be said. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether they had witnessed a moment of tension or truth. But those who understood, really understood, felt it deep in their chest. The joke had shifted. The balance of the room had changed. What was meant to be entertainment had become a mirror. As the band awkwardly cued the transition music, Stephen gave one last attempt at levity. "Well, folks, that's the first time anyone's made me the quiet one on this stage." A few scattered laughs, but it was too late. The silence between the host and the guest wasn't hostile. It was heavy, meaningful. A silence earned through decades of speaking loudly enough for others to finally listen. The camera panned out slowly, trying to capture two professionals still smiling, still performing. But underneath, the truth was raw. That was the moment. The Late Show stopped being just another night of television and became something else entirely, a reckoning disguised as entertainment. And as the applause sign blinked overhead, half-hearted claps filled the room. Colbert tried to laugh it off, but Samuel wasn't playing anymore. Stephen Colbert had spent years mastering the art of recovery. He'd danced his way out of gaffes, steered awkward pauses into punchlines, and turned even controversy into applause. But this time, the rhythm was gone. The laughter had evaporated, replaced by a silence too thick to joke through. He leaned in, smile tight, voice teetering between confidence and caution. "Well, I guess I hit a nerve there, huh, Sam?" A ripple of chuckles moved through the audience, but they were hesitant now, half-hearted. They sensed it too. Something had shifted, something too real for late-night levity. Samuel's gaze was steady. He didn't blink, didn't soften. "You ever notice," he said quietly, "how people only call it anger when we speak up?" It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The words carried more gravity than any raised voice ever could. The audience froze. Colbert blinked once, twice, his practiced grin faltering. The sentence hung there like smoke, filling every inch of the room. Stephen forced a laugh. "Oh, come on now. You know I didn't mean you," he said, gesturing toward him with mock defense. "You're like the king of cool, man. You don't get angry, you make other people angry." It was meant to be flattering. But the compliment landed flat, hollow, performative. Samuel leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. Not in fury, but focus. "That's exactly what I mean," he said. "You package it as entertainment. You call it a bit, but what if it's not a bit? What if it's real? What if we're not performing for you?" The laughter died completely. The camera lights glared hotter. Even the band, halfway through a filler chord, faltered and stopped. In the control room, producers exchanged panicked glances. Someone whispered into a headset, "Can we go to break?" Another voice replied, "Not yet. We can't cut him off mid-sentence. Just ride it out." On stage, Colbert smiled again, that trademark grin he used to disarm presidents and billionaires alike. "I hear you," he said, palms raised. "But come on, it's the Late Show. We're here to have fun, not get too heavy, right?" Samuel tilted his head. "That's the problem, isn't it? Fun until it's not. Truth's only welcome when it fits the joke." A murmur ran through the audience. Some nodded. Some looked away. Everyone felt it. That rare collision of charm and conviction, where politeness couldn't disguise discomfort anymore. Stephen's fingers tapped his desk, his tell when nervous. "You're saying we shouldn't joke about real stuff?" He countered, voice still smooth but thinner now. "That laughter can't be part of the truth?" Samuel smiled faintly. "Laughter's fine, as long as it's not covering something you don't want to talk about." For the first time, Colbert's eyes shifted. The camera caught it, that flicker of unease. He wasn't being mocked or attacked. He was being seen. Samuel leaned back in his chair, calm, centered, fully in control now. "I've been doing this a long time, man. I've seen people laugh their way through pain, through disrespect, through being told who they're supposed to be. And the minute they push back, suddenly they're angry, difficult, ungrateful." You could feel the pulse of the room slow. The audience wasn't watching a late-night skit anymore. They were witnessing a reckoning live. Stephen cleared his throat, voice dipping softer. "You're saying we play into that?" Samuel shrugged lightly. "I'm saying you don't notice when you do. And maybe that's the problem." The words hit harder than a shout ever could. The audience shifted in their seats. The space between the two men became charged, electric. Stephen tried again, quieter this time. "I get that. I really do. But if we can't laugh, what's left?" Samuel met his gaze. Respect. It was simple, clean, devastating. In the control room, the producer finally broke. "Go to commercial now." But the floor manager hesitated. The show was gold, even if it was uncomfortable. Especially because it was uncomfortable. Stephen exhaled, the fight leaving his posture. "Man, you really know how to turn a comedy show into a sermon," he said, half grinning. Samuel chuckled softly, not in amusement, but in peace. Maybe comedy's just the wrong place to hide from honesty. For a long moment, no one spoke. No cue cards, no laughter track, no rescue music. Just two men sitting across from each other. One hiding behind wit, the other wielding truth like a mirror. The tension wasn't hostile anymore. It was cleansing, necessary, the kind of discomfort that makes growth possible. Colbert finally nodded, a small, genuine smile creeping through the cracks. "All right," he said quietly. "Point taken." Samuel returned the smile, but his eyes held that glint, the kind that said he wasn't done yet. Then he asked, almost casually, "So, Stephen, when was the last time you said something real on this stage?" The words cut deeper than any accusation could. Colbert's expression froze. The air turned to glass. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, zooming in instinctively, capturing the precise moment when charm met conviction, and conviction won. In that second, the roles had reversed completely. The interviewer was now the one under scrutiny, and the guest had become the voice of conscience. The silence stretched, beautiful, unbearable, unfiltered, and then Samuel leaned back once more, a faint smirk playing at the edge of his lips, as if daring Stephen to answer, because for the first time in the Late Show's long, laughter-filled history, the host was speechless. And then Samuel asked the question Colbert couldn't answer. The studio was silent, not the silence of awe or confusion, but of collision. Two worlds, two truths, now face to face beneath the heat of the stage lights. Stephen Colbert sat back in his chair, still trying to recover the rhythm, the control he'd lost minutes ago. His usual grin, that safety net, faltered under the weight of Samuel's gaze. The air between them pulsed with the kind of tension you could taste. "Look, man," Colbert began, trying to laugh, "you're making it sound like comedy's the enemy. We're just holding up a mirror. We poke fun at everyone, politicians, celebrities, even ourselves. That's how people deal with the world." Samuel tilted his head, slow and deliberate. "You think jokes make people deal with the world, Stephen?" His voice was low, steady. "Sometimes they just make the world easier to ignore." The audience shifted in their seats. They weren't sure if they were watching a conversation or a confrontation. Some smiled nervously. Others stared transfixed. Colbert leaned forward. "You're saying we can't joke about anything? That's a slippery slope, man. If we stop laughing, we stop surviving." Samuel nodded slightly. "Maybe. But there's a difference between laughing to survive and laughing to forget." A murmur rippled through the audience. The tension had evolved. Not anger, not yet, but something more dangerous, understanding that refused to stay buried. Colbert's fingers tapped against his desk again, the rhythm tighter now. "I think you're overreading it," he said, his tone a mix of nervous charm and subtle defense. "Come on, Sam. We're entertainers, not prophets." "It's all in good fun." Samuel's expression didn't change. "Good fun for who?" That line, quiet, sharp, landed with surgical precision. Colbert froze. His mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. Samuel leaned in, elbows on his knees, eyes unwavering. "I've seen people use humor to soften truth. I've done it myself. But you know what it does? It turns pain into applause. It makes people feel good about the same systems that break others. And when someone calls it out, suddenly they're the problem." The audience wasn't laughing anymore. The lights above the set seemed harsher now, illuminating the sweat forming on Colbert's brow. He chuckled weakly, reaching for a glass of water. "You make it sound like we're part of the machine." Samuel's voice cut cleanly through his deflection. "Aren't we all?" The words lingered heavy and undeniable. Even the band in the corner, usually ready with a timely riff to break tension, stayed frozen. Colbert tried again, softer this time. "Look, I respect what you're saying, I do. But there's something powerful about humor. It brings people together, you know. Maybe you're reading too much into it. Maybe you're just—" He hesitated. It was barely perceptible, the millisecond before he crossed the line. But Samuel saw it. The whole room did. Then Colbert said it. "Maybe you're being a little sensitive, Sam." The reaction was instant. Gasps scattered across the crowd like a wave. One person laughed awkwardly, trying to break the tension, but the sound died in their throat. Samuel didn't move, didn't blink. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of memory, of history, of every coded insult and soft dismissal ever buried beneath the word sensitive. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed low, too calm, too precise. "I've spent my life being told to calm down, Stephen." Colbert's smirk faltered. Samuel's tone sharpened, not loud, but absolute. "Maybe it's time you listen up." That line cracked the air. No shouting, no theatrics, just truth, unvarnished, immovable. The audience sat in suspended disbelief. You could hear the faint buzz of the stage lights, the hum of cameras capturing what no one dared interrupt. Colbert tried to recover, his voice a shade higher. "Hey man, come on, you know I didn't mean—" But Samuel wasn't interested in reassurance. He leaned back now, the storm in him settling into something even more powerful: resolve. "You meant what you said," he replied evenly. "You just didn't think it'd echo." In the control booth, chaos erupted. "Cut to break?" someone asked. "Do it now?" Another producer shook her head. "No, this is real." "Keep it rolling." On stage, the audience's confusion deepened. Some clapped, unsure if this was still part of the show, while others simply stared, frozen in second-hand tension. Colbert swallowed hard, searching for footing. "You're taking it too seriously," he muttered, barely audible over the restless murmurs. Samuel chuckled once, not amused but incredulous. "That's what they always say, isn't it? Every time someone calls out truth, it's too serious. Every time we stop smiling for the camera, it's too much." The crowd's faces reflected every shade of discomfort. Fascination, guilt, admiration. It wasn't entertainment anymore. It was exposure. Samuel continued, voice soft but laced with steel. "You think truth has to make people laugh to be worth hearing. But maybe truth's not supposed to be funny." Colbert's lips parted, his instinct to respond clawing its way up. But nothing came. The charisma, the timing, the control that made him a star. Gone. Samuel's gaze softened, not in pity but in certainty. "You've made a career making the powerful look human," he said. "But tonight, you made humanity look uncomfortable." No one breathed. Colbert looked out at his audience, his people, and saw them watching him differently. Not with admiration, but awareness. He tried to smile. It didn't land. Samuel took one last breath, slow and grounded, then looked straight into the camera lens. Not at Colbert, not at the crowd, but at everyone watching at home, the ones who'd recognize that look, that restraint, that dignity mistaken for defiance. His voice was calm, his words deliberate. "Sometimes silence isn't peace," he said. "It's exhaustion." A sharp inhale rippled through the audience. The truth hit like a tidal wave. Colbert's face paled, the tension carving lines where laughter used to live. He sat motionless, his own stage now a mirror he didn't want to face. The floor manager whispered urgently, "We have to cut, Stephen." But he couldn't move. He was caught in the aftermath of his own line, the one that turned humor into humiliation. Samuel rose slowly from his chair, every motion deliberate, controlled. The microphone wire tugged slightly, brushing against his jacket. He reached for it, fingers curling gently around the clip. For a brief second, their eyes met. The host and the guest, the jester and the truth-teller. No anger, no apology, just understanding, and with one final glance, Samuel reached for his mic. By morning, everyone had an opinion, and no one had the full story. The clip of Samuel L. Jackson and Stephen Colbert's tense exchange had exploded across every corner of the internet. By sunrise, it wasn't just a moment. It was a movement, a battlefield of hashtags and hot takes. Headlines screamed contradictions. Samuel L. Jackson loses it on Colbert. Talk show chaos live. Colbert's joke backfires. Samuel L. Jackson delivers brutal reality check. Hollywood's hypocrisy exposed on national TV. Every network, every blogger, every influencer wanted a piece of the storm. Within hours, the clip had racked up 12 million views on YouTube alone. Twitter, or X, as some still insisted on calling it, turned into a virtual coliseum. Half the country was cheering for Samuel, the other half for Colbert. Fictional tweets, Film Nerd 84. Finally, someone stood up to fake comedy. Samuel didn't snap, he spoke truth. Patriot comedy. Can't take a joke anymore? Sad. Everyone's walking on eggshells. Actress for justice. The calmest man in the room made the loudest point. Respect Samuel. Late night lover. Colbert was just doing his job. Comedians can't survive if truth becomes taboo. Pop culture pulse. This wasn't a fight, it was a mirror. And we didn't like what we saw. The algorithms smelled blood and opportunity. Reaction videos flooded TikTok and YouTube, each one framed as the real truth behind the Colbert-Jackson clash. Some creators paused every second of the footage, analyzing micro-expressions and hidden body language signals. Others used it to fuel larger debates about race, ego, and the shifting line between free speech and accountability. Clips were remixed, subtitled memified. One viral soundbite looped Samuel's line, "Maybe it's time you listen up," set to cinematic music, captioned with a moment that defined dignity. Meanwhile, late-night pundits and podcast hosts scrambled to capitalize. Did Samuel go too far? One headline teased. Or did Colbert finally meet his match? Another offered. Everyone was speaking about them, but only one of them was silent. Samuel L. Jackson vanished from the noise. No interviews. No statements. Not even a social media post. That silence became louder than any outrage. Fans called it class. Critics called it strategy. But to those who'd watched the exchange in full, it felt like something else. Restraint. The kind of restraint only a man with nothing to prove could afford. Entertainment talk shows begged for comment. Magazines offered exclusive cover features. Even PR teams tried to spin the story. Let's reframe it as an important conversation about humor and sensitivity. But Samuel declined them all. He didn't need to defend the truth. It was already on tape. Colbert, on the other hand, couldn't escape it. Every camera that once adored him now looked for cracks. His signature smirk appeared strained. His jokes about touchy topics landed with uneasy chuckles. By midweek, his team arranged a clarification segment, a carefully worded, highly produced monologue intended to address the moment with empathy and accountability. When the night came, Colbert walked onto the stage alone. His tone was soft, almost too measured. "Sometimes," he began, "in the heat of live conversation, words come out wrong. I've always believed comedy should challenge but never harm. If anyone, especially my friend Samuel, felt disrespected, that was never my intent." The audience applauded. But it was the kind of applause that came from politeness, not conviction. His words sounded crafted, not felt. The teleprompter told a story of reflection, but his eyes told one of regret. The internet was quick to judge. Real sign watch. That wasn't an apology. That was PR damage control. Comedy Nation. He owned it. People just love tearing down good men now. Truth Seeker 101. He apologized because he had to, not because he wanted to. The digital divide grew sharper. Think pieces appeared overnight. The death of comedy in the age of outrage. Others fired back. Accountability isn't censorship. Cable news invited panels of experts, comedians, psychologists, influencers, to dissect what had happened, as though a moral earthquake could be explained in sound bites. But while America argued, Samuel stayed silent. Weeks passed, and still, his voice never entered the fray. No rebuttal, no interviews, no commentary, only silence, calm, unwavering, deliberate. And in that quiet, people began to listen differently. Clips replayed, analyses softened. Viewers started to notice what they'd missed before, that Samuel hadn't raised his voice, hadn't insulted, hadn't stormed off. He'd simply stood his ground, with composure that outlasted the chaos. It wasn't the argument that went viral. It was the contrast between performance and presence, Between laughter and listening, the same world that lived on outrage suddenly found itself haunted by a man who refused to play the game. And as the noise began to fade, one truth became clear: Samuel's silence was not retreat. It was revelation. But Samuel's silence would soon speak louder than any interview ever could.